How to make and use RAMP, Reflex Action Mortality Predictor. Linking stressors and vitality impairment with fisheries bycatch, mortality, and survival. Objectives: use reflex actions and injury to score vitality impairment and predict fisheries bycatch, mortality, and survival. Define the relationship between vitality impairment and mortality as a RAMP, Reflex Action Mortality Predictor. Why is vitality impairment related to mortality? By definition, healthy animals have full vitality. Vitality becomes impaired as animals become stressed by capture and handling. Severe vitality impairment can result from the effects of physical injury or other stressors, fatigue, temperature, light, sea state, and air exposure. Maladaptive stress responses or critical injury associated with severe vitality impairment can result in immediate and delayed mortality. Why score reflex actions in injury? Reflex actions are fixed behavior patterns that are directly related to vitality impairment, without control by volitional behavior factors: motivation, hunger, fear, shelter seeking, migration, and reproduction. Reflex actions reflect the state of neural, muscle, and organ functions. Injuries are directly related to vitality impairment because they can control neural, muscle, and organ functions. RAMP has been used to predict discard mortality and unobserved bycatch mortality in fishes and crustaceans exposed to fishery stressors: air exposure, temperature and depth changes, gear types, injury, and fatigue. The diagram shows fishing stressors associated with vitality impairment and mortality. The fish path during capture and discard can be described, coming from depth through a thermocline to the surface and then back down to the bottom after discarding. Cumulative stress results from exposure to several different fishing stressors. Advantages of the RAMP approach. RAMP can be used with low cost and effort for fisheries experiments and evaluation. Simple method which allows for citizen science and fisher assessment of stressor effects. Less invasive to animals than blood sampling and biopsy methods. RAMP has been used to quantify delayed mortality rates, to test hypotheses about sublethal and mortality effects of fishing stressors, to monitor vitality impairment and mortality in fisheries, and to guide design and test efficacy for improved fishing gears, deployment, and animal handling. A summary of steps to make and use RAMP. The diagram shows steps to make and use RAMP. Step 1. Identify consistent reflex actions. Step 2. Conduct stress experiments. Step 3. Model relationship between reflex impairment and mortality, and predict mortality in fisheries. The details of these steps will be explained. Step 1. Identify consistent reflex actions. A. Obtain control animals. Capture uninjured animals in the field using trap, dip net, seine, or trawl with the objective of minimizing capture stress. A picture shows beach seining to collect fish and using recreational pots to collect crabs. Step 1, B. Test candidate reflex actions before and after recovery. Stimulate the captured animals to determine what innate reflex actions a species has and how they respond to stimuli. Let the animals recover from capture stress in controlled tanks or cages. After recovery, retest reflex actions in the minimally stressed animals. The picture shows brown trout in a net for reflex action testing, and testing Dungeness crab for reflex actions. The picture shows a tank on a boat to hold animals for recovery from capture stress, or a tank in a laboratory to hold animals for recovery from capture stress. Step 1, C. Determine reflex actions that consistently respond to stimuli. Set the final list of reflex actions and, if appropriate, injuries to be scored. Deep hooking, jaw or appendage tearing or loss, bleeding, abrasion from fishing gear, and barotrauma. Examples of consistent reflex actions tested in fish. For round fish, tail grab, body flex, head complex, eye roll, orientation. For flatfish, orientation, tail grab, operculum, mouth, eye roll. Examples of consistent reflex actions tested in crabs. For Dungeness crabs, mouth defense, chela closure, leg wrap, leg curl, abdomen response. Step 1, D. For each reflex action, determine what is meant by present or absent. Examples of Plaice reflex actions. Orientation. Place fish upside down in water. Reflex present. Fish returns to upright position. Reflex absent. Fish remains upside down. Tail grab. Grab fish tail in water. Reflex present. Fish quickly swims away. Reflex absent. Fish does not swim away. Operculum. Use probe to open operculum. Reflex present. Operculum clamps shut tightly. Reflex absent. Operculum opens easily without clamping. Mouth. Use probe to open mouth. Reflex present. Mouth clamps shut tightly. Reflex absent. Mouth opens easily without clamping. Eye roll. Rotate fish along its long axis. Reflex present. Eyes rotate to maintain orientation. Reflex absent. Eyes do not rotate to maintain orientation. Orientation present. Eye roll present. Operculum present. Mouth present. Tail grab present. Orientation absent. Eye roll, absent. Operculum, absent. Mouth, absent. Tail grab, present. Dungeness crab reflex actions. Mouth defense. Use a probe to pull forward the third maxillipeds. Reflex present. Crab defends maxillipeds with chela. Reflex absent. Crab allows probing of maxillipeds. Chela closure. Use a probe to stimulate chela. Reflex present. Crab closes chela and then opens chela unaided. Reflex absent. Crab does not close and open chela. Leg wrap. Pull a walking leg straight out on one side of the crab and release. Reflex present. Crab draws leg back. Reflex absent. Crab does not draw leg back. Leg curl. Pull fifth leg straight out and down and release. Reflex present. Crab draws leg back. Reflex absent. Crab does not draw leg back. Abdomen response. Use a probe to pull the abdominal flap away from the body. Reflex present. Crab becomes agitated. Reflex absent. Crab does not react. Mouth defense, present. Chela closure, present. Leg wrap, present. Leg curl, present. Abdomen response, present. Mouth defense, present. Chela closure, absent. Leg wrap, absent. Leg curl, present. Abdomen response, present. Scoring impairment with reflex actions and injury. A reflex action is scored as present, 0, unimpaired, when strong or easily observed, or absent, 1, impaired, when not present, weak, or there is doubt about being present. A barotrauma or injury symptom is scored as absent, 0, unimpaired, when not present, or there is doubt about presence, or present, 1, impaired, when easily observed. Scoring vitality impairment for ramp. Reflex actions, barotrauma, and injury scores for an individual animal are summed to calculate vitality impairment, or summed and divided by the total possible observable impairments to calculate proportion vitality impairment. Example of a proportion for a fully impaired animal with 5 absent reflex actions and 1 present injury. 6 divided by 6 equals 1. Example of a proportion for a control animal. 0 divided by 6 equals 0. Scoring vitality impairment in general. Any type of reflex action or injury that is related to vitality can be summed to score vitality impairment. The important point is that a sum of presence-absence scores for vitality characteristics produces an index of vitality impairment. This vitality index can then be used as a measure of variability for sublethal stressor effects in fisheries, as well as a validated indicator and predictor of mortality and survival. Step 2. Conduct stress experiments. A. Clearly identify relevant stressors present in the fishery that will be evaluated using RAMP. For your particular fishery, you can use the fish path analysis to identify the relevant stressors. Step 2, B. Design and conduct field or lab stress experiments. Include all relevant stressors that occur in the fishery that will be evaluated using RAMP. The diagram shows an example of a flowchart for experimental treatments, simulating stressors in longline and trawl fisheries. Fish are taken from a holding tank and exposed to hooking or towing, followed by exposure to seawater temperatures, followed by exposure to air, and then placed in a recovery tank to observe immediate and delayed mortality. Step 2, C. Quantify resulting reflex impairment, injury, and immediate mortality. Also record all relevant factors: species, length, sex, reproductive condition, location, depth, tow duration, air and water temperatures, sunlight, sea state, and handling time. Step 2, D. Observe animals to determine delayed mortality for each impairment score. Captive observation or tagging stress must be minimized by using optimal controlled holding conditions or tagging methods. Captive observation to determine delayed mortality can be made in animals in cages, which excludes predation, or can be made in animals in tanks, which excludes predation. Field release to determine delayed mortality can be made with tagging or biotelemetry of fishes, which includes predation, or in crabs, which includes predation. Step 3. Model relationship between reflex impairment and mortality, and predict mortality in fisheries. A. Create RAMP that explains relationship between vitality impairment and mortality. The graphs show a RAMP predictor for Atlantic cod discard mortality, where reflex impairment is on the x-axis and mortality is on the y-axis. The graph shows a RAMP predictor for tanner crab discard mortality, with reflex impairment score on the x-axis and mortality on the y-axis. Step 3, B. Use RAMP to predict mortality and evaluate effects of stressors in fisheries. Evaluate effects of biological, environmental, and fishery factors on bycatch mortality and survival. The table shows an example of seasonal effects on yellowtail flounder discard vitality impairment and mortality estimates for the scallop dredge fleet. You can see a clear seasonal effect on RAMP scores and mortality scores with their lower and upper confidence intervals. This data has been used in stock assessments. Important points for creating a RAMP. Choose reflex actions that are consistently present in unstressed animals. Clearly define what is meant by present and absent for reflex actions and injuries. Score reflex actions as present, absent, because scoring strength of actions is dependent on size or weight. Standardize testing for reflex impairment and injury. Clearly identify relevant stressors in the fishery that will be evaluated using RAMP and include them in stressor experiments. Design stressor experiments that will result in vitality impairment and delayed mortality ranging from 0 to 100% to produce a complete RAMP relationship. Minimize stress for animals in captive observation or tagging methods for observing delayed mortality. Delayed mortality for control animals indicates that holding conditions are stressful and should be improved. RAMP is part of an integrated approach for estimating mortality of fishery discards and escapees associated with fishing stressors. RAMP also can be used to test effects of gear modifications and to determine ways to reduce bycatch mortality. Selected references for RAMP are listed in the following 3 pages. For more detailed RAMP and vitality assessment information, go to the RAMP webpage or contact Michael Davis, email, or Noel Yoakum, email. Thank you for your interest and attention.